smart grid infrastructure. Network infrastructure has been put in to support smart grid, so I come up with the whole digital energy. And originally I named this talk BPT for basic persistent threat out of my severe frustration with what was going on in the community, with everybody getting hacked with basics, specifically in the telco service provider, utility, SCADA environments. Then whenever anything happened, they blame it on APT. You get hacked, it's APT. But it's always the basics. So I came up with BPT to make fun of everybody blaming that. And by the time we get done with this presentation, I'll introduce you to a new term I'll come up with called BPT, Vendor Persistent Threat. Because after I started presenting this at CarolinaCon back in the spring, come up, man, there's a common thread. It's all about the vendors. The vendors are the issue. So basically what we're seeing out in the field with critical infrastructure is if you can get one basic, real easy handhold into the network, the trust relationships are so wide open that you can pivot at will and move horizontal and vertically through the network with no challenges. Once you get that initial handhold, the vendors have got wide open remote access. You're not going to have any issues getting into the network remotely because they don't trust their customers to be able to run the network systems that they put in. They basically support the local technicians to keep everything running for them. So if you can pop a vendor, you can have access into the network really easy. It's not an APT, you don't have to blame PLA for all this stuff, even if they may be involved sometimes. And the big issue is the flat earth philosophy, big, flat, non-segmented networks. And so here's the kind of networks that I spend my time in. I'm either architecting what we call a next generation network for converged service provider telco, where it's getting in the marketplace, it's getting very gray between the telco, the utility, the cable company, the service providers, because they're all into the quad play, the voice, video, internet, wireless backhaul, providing all these services over a single infrastructure. Only differentiated maybe the utilities where they're in the water, gas, and power business. But they're all running all these services over the fiber that they're rolling out, like the utilities are rolling out fiber to the meter in many cases, and the telcos maybe even providing the smart grid infrastructure to the utility in some cases. But what you have is at the very top is you got what we call in the business in the telco world, the OSS and BSS, the operational support system and the business support system. Business support system is more like the ERP for the telco service providers where you have where the real business gets done. And the operational support systems, the OSS at the top, those systems is how things get provisioned and monitored and managed. And then you work your way down into the clouds, you get into the core infrastructure where you have your core routers, you might have your optical DWDM infrastructure. Maybe if you've got a upgraded network, or maybe golden optical network where you can dynamically manage and dynamically allocate lambdas across your fiber and provision optical wavelengths on demand. And then you work your way on down, and depending on the organization, they may go with a passive optical network or an active DD network, or it could be still a mixture of the legacy TDM sonic stuff is dying out. But you'll see a mix of these things. But what's important with this, that over on the right, is as you work down through those layers, in all those different systems, they all have a unique vendor. And all of those vendors want remote access into these networks to help their customers keep these systems running. And they open up a very broad attack surface. So when you go in as red team, to go in and do an audit, whether it was PCI or one of the other compliance tests, or they're just getting a security assessment for insurance purposes, what we're seeing now is everybody's concerned about the new directives coming out of the White House. They're afraid if it's going to have a mandate, not voluntary, suggestions to try to do security. So they're bringing in red teams to test things, and what we're finding is there's this really broad attack surface coming from the internet in, and once you can get a basic handhold on any of these services, you can pivot at will into these assets because of the lack of segmentation and lack of a mind of security. And I get to go into some real world details here, examples.
Are the same vendors used in the United States as are used in other countries?
Oh,
so are these vulnerabilities
yes.
across? It's not just unique to our country.
Yes, they're rather than on the road. I was just in Austria last week, and at Eat Intel having the same conversation. It's everywhere, wherever you go. Because we're all going to the same schools and getting the same training. You go to get Cisco, Juniper training, Microsoft training, they're using the same stuff. And nobody's teaching in any of these courses the trust relationship, the interdependencies, locking those things down, the horizontal movement that is teaching how to, get blinky lights working. So with the SCADA, this is an example. This is a diagram of the ANSI ISA 99 standard for SCADA, which is International Standards Body for Industrial Control Systems and SCADA. And that diagram on the right is how they suggest things get implemented with proper segmentation between all the different layers of the architecture with firewalls, in trust relationships, with lockdown need to know. That's a real nice diagram. That is far from reality. Somebody's probably doing this. I haven't ran into it yet. If this was implemented and was properly configured with proper egress, which is another foreign concept, egress, who does egress supposed to be? But in reality, what we see on the ground is where you see firewalls. In reality, what we see, if you go in and do if you're part of a red team, you go in and do a compliance test, see how far deep in the network you can get in. What you're going to find is in many cases where they have firewalls here, they'll have like literally an NT4.0 box. If they're lucky, they got an XP box. I'm serious, you can't make this stuff up. It's XP multi-home. That's secure. If you don't believe it, ask the manager. They're going to be real red face and argue either that this is secure because their vendor told them it was. The vendor and then they play golf together, and they fish together. And this is secure. They pay a lot of money for it. And another example is whole firewall stuff here. And where I started coming up with the vendor persistent threat concept with SCADA. One of the examples I've seen with a utility went in and looked at their network. The firewall was configured. Cisco firewall permit any both in and out.
What's wrong with that?
I'm over here, about to pass out, getting lightheaded.
Firewall says so on the box.
That's right. I mean, the guy had to go out of his way to do permit in and out. And this was a vendor. They put this in, a billing system. They put this in, cloud. They put it in a cloud-based service, so all of the main services are in the cloud, and they put a firewall in to protect the local land. So after I recovered from seeing this firewall config, with my voice cracking, I asked the manager, please show me your SCADA system, because this was on the business system. And I'm like, surely whoever did the SCADA system did it right. It gets better. So I'm asking the manager, show me your SCADA system. How do you access it? Faster than my eyes can keep up with. He whips out his Android phone, no password, hits B and C and has SCADA in my face. On his phone. My jaw's dropped. And so I go in, because I'm a consultant. I get paid by the hour. I got to get billed by the hour. But I'm like, look, I will sit here and work with you till we get this cleaned up for free, my time. I'm going to do my civic and patriotic duty. Dude, I'm here to help you. I'm not going to take advantage of you. I'm really here to help you. I'll do this all for free. And he gets mad at me. We think this is, and I start trying to explain to him. Show him one more time. Let's do this in slow motion. Pull the phone out of your pocket. And he gets very, very angry because another vendor put this system. That's a Cisco VPN box. Said he put on a SCADA system. And in his answer, his response was, well, our guys love it because when they go through it, they set the tree stand and they can monitor the system. Make sure I can sympathize with that. I'm a rabid deer hunter. I'm going to need therapy because I'm going to miss the open day of deer season in Tennessee for a derby hunt. So I appreciate that. But it's like, dude, we need to do a little bit. So that is what's happening. And that's what's not hidden in the news and nobody wants to talk about. Two cases. One vendor put in a firewall, permitting any, another one put in the firewall in front of the SCADA system with no passwords, A, B, and C right up. And then another example where after we went in and did an audit to a particular network many years ago and gave them an architecture review and told them how to clean the network, they put the firewalls and stuff in place. And we came in here about 4 years later and did another audit. There's so many holes in the firewall that all you have to do is go in and hit them with a phishing attack. And the firewall's got so many holes in it, you can freely, horizontally, vertically hit it all through the network now. It's like, why did you put the firewalls in? It's just the best of their router. I mean, it's just so wide open so that they can work from their desk on the enterprise network and access all the critical infrastructure. But if an auditor comes in and looks at it, well, they got a firewall, check the box. So that's important, really going in and as a country, we really need to go enforce and mandate red teams. Somebody needs to go and do this, these networks, and make sure that we're not just checking boxes and looking at blinky lights in the rack and looking for brand name, they got Cisco Juniper firewall. So here's an example of a soft switch network. Basically what soft switch is, if you got a Cisco call manager in your enterprise, same concept for a telco, but it's a system that would consolidate a room full of equipment, say the size of this room, there's rows and rows of old class 5 telco systems. You can now consolidate it down to a less than a half a rack of voice systems to run a large regional geographic area. And we call it a soft switch in the telco world. And what happens with the soft switch vendors, in many cases, they know that they're going into an environment that has not changed since the first system got put in 20, 30 years ago. And they go and drop in all this new IP technology. They got to help keep the guys running, help them provision it, help them troubleshoot it remotely. And so what they will do is drop in a multi-home Linux box in some cases, one leg to the internet and one leg into the voice network, into the trusted voice core infrastructure, as in 911, dial tone for emergencies, etc. And what we've seen is those systems get put in and totally bypass firewalls in some cases because of politics. There's not a corporate security policy. I hate compliance, paperwork, auditing. But somebody needs to do it. I'm a big believer in going after these telcos. Somebody needs to write these policies to force the conviction. Because what we're seeing is these things are getting SSH brute force, and then we get called after they get notified by the Bank of England to cease and desist. This IP address is attacking our bank, and turns around our system as their core voice switch. And they're lucky it's script reading and not an advanced adversary who would just go and pop the box and go silent, fix it, lock it down, and just wait until to a more appropriate time to do something with it. Here's another example with the critical infrastructure. We start going in and doing auditing and testing and moving into the network, getting into the provisioning systems and the network management, the element management system, what we call the EMS that manages the core infrastructure of the network. What we'll end up finding is in some cases what has been sold and what's being pushed out to enterprises. So it might be a telco that's selling services to the smart grid. There's what might be marketed as a ring topology. When I was in the enterprise world, I thought a ring was a ring, a geographic ring. But what actually gets put in place in some cases that you got to be very careful about if you're out doing testing and look at an auditing is it when they say they have a ring, is it a collapsed ring where it's a single bundle of fiber that runs down the interstate and is electronically and logically looped with redundant hardware on both ends, so that one backhoe, one drum driver, one squirrel or raccoon, or a couple of meth heads wanting copper can cut the line and take out a major geographic area and lots of services. And the reason I bring up the meth head analogy is I actually had a customer that had this top architecture where they had a ring to meet SEC requirements for 911. You have to have an electronic logical ring. Well, they had some entrepreneurial bubbas in their area decided that they were going to go into the copper business and climb their poles and thought that they were going to cut the wire and get copper. But what they cut was fiber and knocked out the connection between two major geographic areas. And that was the ring. So But that's something that, and when we go out and do red teams and audits and looking at networks, there's something to be aware of. If that's the only thing they've got, it is what it is, but at least it needs to be documented and it's not just swept under the rug. You say, that everything's good and, a tornado or something comes through and knocks out major telecommunications. So in this example, this is another building system vendor, a lot of building system vendors. I've come to the point here recently that they are the biggest problem in critical infrastructure in the BPT. In this case, we had a telco went in and did a red team event against their network, did a pen test, and started popping boxes, popped their web server, got a shell on an Apache server. And what we found is the shell that we got was on their internal building system. We thought we were on their external web system, their external building system. It turns out it was. They both had their external building system and their internal building system that ran the whole financial operation all on one system. And in security, if you don't believe it, ask the vendor, who is now a security assessment vendor, by the way. And so basically what happened, we did directory traversal to them, got a shell as well. I think it was like a JBoss shell on the guy. And we're able to pivot around into the network. And by way of that connection and the trust relationships, this is what I'd like to bear down on these networks, is the trust relationships. That building system has a trust relationship to that box up in the right-hand corner where the real business gets done, with automated provisioning, so that when you go online and you want new cable TV services, you want a DSL service, new bandwidth, you paid your bill or you didn't pay your bill, service can be automatically turned on or turned off without having to do a truck roll in and in. By way of popping that one building system, you can go and gain influence and access because of the lack of segmentation and security. You can go and get into the middleware for the cable TV and get into, say, the network management systems for the transport and the routers and the switches, etc., which wreak absolute havoc down into those network services. And in this case, this particular network, they're also providing transport networks for smart grid. So not only if you're an adversary, you get to pop this network. Not only do you get a telco for your hardware, you also can get a couple of utilities. So we got to when we go in and start doing pen testing of these networks, really need to go bear down on these trust relationships between all these systems. And what ended up happening here is the vendor not only put in that building system with that bad architecture with no DMZ segmentation. We tried to go in and lay out an architecture of how that thing should be done. We no longer get to do pen testing. They've become a pen testing company. And they're doing pen testing for this organization now. One of the things I learned is whoever runs the building system, whoever that vendor is, they win all arguments with the C-suite. That's all of us techies that are involved with red teaming. We've really got to get a business conversation where we can win these matches with the vendors that are doing this to these customers.
Well, that was secure as hell if you broke into.
They still think it's secure. They still think it's secure. It's amazing. It's amazing. I'm not into regulation. I don't want to be controlled and told what to do. But if you're going to be in the critical infrastructure business, as a country, we're going to have a handle because they're not going to do anything except to go by, do just enough, spend enough money to check a box to get an insurance break because they really don't care about security. Don't tell me what I don't want to know. Just the lowest price vendor, whether they can really test the network or not, is going to get the job. And they prefer the one that's not going to break into anything, like their building system. And the building system guy's not going to break into his building system. Now he wants to keep the job. So here's an example of, we always talk about the insider threat. There's no insider threat. Right? There's no insider threat. But here's an insider incident. In this case, it was not intentional. It was accidental, but it easily could have been worse if it was intentional. Cox Communication a couple of years ago had an example of this where they had a router guy go over and start shutting down stuff as he found out he was going to get fired. But in this case, we have a telco, and they rolled out a big flat layer 2 core infrastructure right there in the middle of the network. The core fiber transport network is layer 2, one big flat layer 2 network. I'm a router guy, drives me nuts. I'm all about breaking things up in segments, but that's what they want. And what this particular vendor does with this layer 2 architecture they offer, they have multiple VLANs. They have a VLAN dedicated for voice, VLAN for cable TV video, internet, and other services. And any service that gets put into the VLAN is dedicated for video. They have broke the RFCs for multicast. It does not go and do the whole IGMP query reporting process at layer 2. It automatically ACEs. If it gets put into that VLAN, it automatically replicates it out across the whole network. So you got this big geographic layer 2 flat network. And anything that's put in that video network is just getting hammered out in the ASICs and hardware. So, so the telco technician accidentally provisions the internet VLAN over into this cable TV network. And as internet subscribers are, their subscribers as well, was heavily infected with malware. And this was like, people doing ICMP attacks against Microsoft. When they put that in, when that guy actually does that, it rolls the whole network over, as in over. Everything lays on top of that fiber, Metro Ethernet transport network, rolls the whole thing over. They call me with their hair on fire on the interstate, and luckily they have instrumentation in the network, so we can come in out of band and do look at flow, net flow, and PCAP that I had installed for them months earlier for a security solution. And there's nothing like being on the interstate and pull over and troubleshoot a PCAP over a cell phone with a whole telco down. And it was, don't recommend it. And what's even crazier is trying to read that PCAP and then come to the point where you realize that they have ICMP denial of service traffic encapsulated in IGMP layer 2 traffic. I swear, I thought I was going to do this talk. I wish I had a PCAP to show you, because that's the only IGMP layer 2 with ICMP encapsulated DOS traffic. And it's the craziest PCAP. Having troubleshoot that. We finally figured out what they had going on. But insider attack there. Very well could have been a rogue employee or someone who broke in through and pivoted over into the provisioning network. Now here's a problem from a hacking critical infrastructure application that I'm seeing a lot. We saw this originally. I discovered this with a couple of telcos where somebody from an interesting IP address from somewhere else in the world was started targeting DSL routers. And one telco they had, before they stopped it, about 600 routers popped, and they got to stop because they had net flow. I'm a huge advocate of net flow and having a full PCAP to capture as much data as you can out of band so that you can troubleshoot these networks. So that one telco was able to capture it. Then the second one, before they got it stopped, they had 6,000 DSL routers popped. And the only thing that had to happen there is a mine for separation of services. The control plane locking down the protocols, how the protocols are going to communicate, and then the management plane of how the devices were going to be managed, and then the whole data plane. They did not put any attention into that, into the separation of services, which nobody does. I'm still looking for a network that where management and control plane, data plane are separated and locked down hard, like they should be. I have a dream. I'm going to see that today. And then in here recently, this same problem Brazil had. They had $4.5 million problem before they had to stop. And now we just here recently, we saw it again just a few weeks ago, where these DSL routers are being popped. But this time, it's more of a denial of service. The first couple of times we saw it, they were popping the routers and reconfiguring the DNS settings that were being sent out through DHCP on the customer side, and redirecting the DNS to a data center in another part of the world.
Was this a firmware exploit, or did the company have the management interface on the routers open to the internet?
They had the management interface open to the internet. And there was a backdoor password. I'm telling you, vendor persistent threat, undocumented account. They thought they had a user account password, they thought they were good. And then one of them 600 routers, another one 6,000, Brazil 4.5 million. And then we just saw this here recently where some routers are being popped. And they're doing something, we haven't done the full forensics of it, but they've done something to the firmware where the routers are doing a denial of service now, they're just killing it. But when we go out and do pen testing, when you go out and go and look at a client, really pay attention to and target that whole control plane, management plane, separation of services. That's the low hanging fruit. It is for me. The network protocols, they're just easy. It's easy. It's like Microsoft, Unicode, decode. It's there. Guaranteed.
Is this one of those setups where the ISP still owns the modem, or did the customer technically own the modem?
ISP's on the modem. The ISP's on the modem. They may charge the customer, but they manage it. So here's the scenario. Again, if you're out going and doing pen testing against some of these critical infrastructure guys that are rolling out converged networks, offering multiple services over the new network that they're rolling out, per se, for smart grid, et cetera. The thing to look at is going after all of these back office systems. Because in this case, I was at a utility and the vendors were dropping in routers and nailing up point-to-point VPNs. If you buy their system, you're buying a point-to-point VPN. Some of them they may do a remote access VPN, SSH, but in this case they're secure because they do a dedicated point-to-point. But nobody's asking, what if the vendor gets popped? Because the business I'm in, I look at the big picture, the macro picture, coming up with a strategy, and it's just obvious. Just go pop the vendors now. So in this case, the vendor got hit, and through that trust relationship, someone, an adversary, was able to pivot over from the vendor network over into the back office network where the assets of the infrastructure was, and pop their box. And we know that happened because the vendor showed up unannounced, unrequested, and started ripping their stuff out with no reason. And I was on the side. So, being a curious person I am, I started asking questions on my customer's behalf, and it turns out that they got hacked. The question I have is how much more pivoting happened before they ever showed up and stopped the attack on their network and whatever happened to that customer. But one thing you'll understand with critical infrastructure, some questions they just don't know the answers to. Cost money. Don't ask, don't tell. Now, what I'm thinking about from a red team standpoint, that I want to do in the future engagement and go and start showing people is what if an adversary was to go and target a specific vendor based on press releases, LinkedIn people bragging about the stuff that they're working on. You go and say top vendor 2 there, and you're able to go and break into end customer networks, and then turn around and pivot back out and attack other vendors and their customers, and spread influence across all of those different customers and all of their different endpoint customers. And you can spread your habit. It's something to think about as a red team, to set something up like that with the customers and show them how this type of attack can happen. And in this case, the telco put in a new transport network. Now, this was put in place by at different sides of the business. There was two sides of the business. There was the internet side, who had a clue about security and made a huge investment in security, $200,000. And then there was the voice transport network side that didn't care about security. They just provide dial tone and T1 and T3, and, keep the blinking lights working on both ends of the circuits. And their vendor, who put in the new transport network, they required and demanded their own server be put in, and not have to go deal with those little security guys that get in the way of doing business now. We got business. And so what they put in place here was a multi-home Linux box with one leg into the core transport network that everything rides across. It manages the fiber, and then one leg that bypassed the firewall. And they literally, they literally got a call from a bank in England. That's how they discovered that an SSH brute force had been conducted against that EMS, what we call element management system, was conducted against that, and the brute force attack from somewhere in Europe was successful, and they turned around and pivoted off of it and attacked another bank in Europe. I think it was a bank in England, or a bank in England, and that's how they found out that happened. So if you go out and do your pen testing, especially if you're going to see opportunities like this. The old relentless brute force stuff, it works. You just got to go fire it up and let it run. Make sure you put that in your side, so you're going to do it. They're not going for those cases kind of pass it with account lockout. Just that they're still go at it. Eventually we'll get in these guys out. So from a red team and from a blue team standpoint, is no matter where we go, no matter what network we plug into, the layer 2 issues are what's driving me absolutely crazy. If you can go and get any kind of access into the network and see the layer 2 protocol, it is freaking wide open. And it was hard created like in the early 80s, Ethernet, for what? 20 freaking years, and we're still, it takes more time to boot your laptop than to own the network with ARP coding. And it doesn't matter where you plug in. It works. And then the first hop redundancy protocols, like I'm a Cisco guy, so like HSRP or VRRP if you're not a Cisco guy, or the global load balancing protocol, GLDP, any of those. The IPv6 stuff, all of that layer 2 stuff is typically wide open and neglected and still low hanging fruit in these networks. One of the things that I'm trying to get customers to understand and learn, any of you guys heard of Option 82? You ever heard of Option 82? I'm trying to get, especially with enterprises, we use Option 82 in the telco world for lawful intercept from the wiretap. And so basically what happens, you can turn on DHCP snooping on your edge switches. So whenever a DHCP request is sent, the switch sees that, and it will inject into the header of that DHCP request the name of the chassis and the physical interface that request is coming from, and send it up to the DHCP server. So you know exactly where that IP address request came from, and who's got it, and when they got it, and when they go away. And you get that by way of DHCP Option 82. The problem is if you're a Microsoft shop, unless the latest version of Microsoft serves the DHCP application, it may support it, but nothing I'm aware of supports Option 82 out of Microsoft. If you guys do something commercial, or there's some Linux open source DHCP application that'll support this Option 82, so that you can really chase down an IP address that is in the network. And I'm becoming a really big advocate. We need to go and put in the port address, port security on these networks and lock down these layer 2 interfaces. Who's coming into the network? There's just no reason for it. I mean, everybody's bought and spent all of this money on new Cisco and Juniper networks, and they're not using these basic knobs to turn to lock down the layer 2. From a defense standpoint, a recommendation to the customers. Everybody's talking about application workplace whitelisting. What I want to do with these with these SCADA networks, these telco networks, especially the control plane and the management plane of the networks and the operation support provisioning, there's no reason that the traffic flow cannot be laid out and defined and then whitelisted in the network infrastructure. These devices are going to call. This is how they're going to call. This is when they're going to call. This is what the traffic flows should be, and lock that down. Anything else is not permitted. And if anybody tries to, it's log that instead of being wide open like it is today. Instead of just going trying to secure the host, let's secure the network and lock down the traffic flows. And then whatever we lock down as needed traffic flows in the greater area, then go and monitor that and log that at what's abnormal and cut down on all the noise that we're having to digest with our network monitoring. That's what I have for you today. Any questions?
So one of your comments I found really interesting, just in terms of your experience, is seeing that visibility is accountability. A lot of times we talk about critical infrastructure, people mention they don't want to see it. You view that as one of the biggest adversaries for those environments in terms of being able to I know we have there's a recommendation coming by engineering from the federal level. But do you think it's actually going to take